Imagine you are standing on the deck of a Royal Navy warship in 1718. You have got 60 cannons, 300 sailors, and direct orders from the King of England to hunt down every pirate in the Caribbean. You spot a sail on the horizon. A small, sleek vessel cutting across the water at an angle your ship could never match. You give the order to pursue. Your crew scrambles, the sails go up, the chase begins. And for the next 6 hours, you watch that ship get smaller and smaller until it vanishes completely beyond the edge of the world. That ship was a schooner, and it did not just outrun you. It humiliated you. For nearly a century, the schooner was the single greatest advantage pirates had over the most powerful navies on Earth. Faster, lighter, and more maneuverable than anything the British, Spanish, or French could put on the water, this ship turned Caribbean outlaws into ghosts. They could strike merchant convoys, steal everything that was not nailed down, and disappear before the Navy even finished loading its cannons. The great irony? The schooner was not invented by pirates. It was invented by the people trying to build a legitimate shipping industry. Pirates just figured out what it could really do. So how did a fishing boat design from the coast of Massachusetts become the most feared vessel in the golden age of piracy? How did it change the way pirates operated, the way navies fought, and the way empires protected their wealth? To understand that, we need to go back to where it all started. And we need to look at a map. Picture the Atlantic coastline of North America in the late 1600s. From the rocky shores of Nova Scotia down through the harbors of Massachusetts, shipbuilders were solving a problem that had nothing to do with piracy. They needed a vessel that could handle the brutal, unpredictable waters of the North Atlantic. A ship that could navigate shallow coastal inlets where larger vessels would run aground. Something fast enough to get the day's catch back to port before it spoiled. Something tough enough to survive a nor'easter without snapping in half. Now, zoom out. Follow the trade routes south from Boston and New York, past the Carolinas, past the tip of Florida, and into the Caribbean. Thousands of islands scattered across warm, shallow waters. Narrow channels between them. Hidden coves tucked behind mangrove forests. Coral reefs just beneath the surface that would rip the hull off a deep-drafted warship. This is the geography that made piracy possible. And this is the geography the schooner was accidentally built to dominate. The word schooner likely comes from a Scottish word, scan, meaning to skip across water like a flat stone. And that is exactly what the first schooners did. The commonly accepted story places the first true schooner launch in Gloucester, Massachusetts, around 1713. A shipbuilder named Andrew Robinson supposedly designed a vessel with a radical new sail plan, and when it slid off the ways into the harbor, a spectator shouted, "See how she scoons?" Robinson reportedly said, "A schooner let her be." Whether that story is perfectly accurate or a bit of maritime legend dressed up over the centuries, the timing lines up. By the 1710s, schooners were appearing all along the American coast, and the design was unlike anything else on the water. Traditional square-rigged ships, the kind the Royal Navy used, carried massive rectangular sails hung perpendicular to the hull. These sails were spectacular when the wind was directly behind you. A square-rigged warship running before a strong tailwind was one of the fastest things on Earth. But the moment the wind shifted, the moment you needed to change direction, the moment you needed to sail at an angle to the wind, everything slowed down. Turning a square-rigged ship was like trying to parallel park a school bus. It required dozens of sailors hauling on lines, adjusting yards, and physically repositioning enormous sections of canvas. It took time. And time was the one thing you did not have when a pirate was getting away. The schooner threw all of that out. Instead of square sails hung sideways across the ship, schooners used fore and aft rigging. Their sails ran along the length of the vessel, parallel to the hull, mounted on tall masts with long booms at the bottom. This configuration changed everything about how a ship interacted with the wind. A schooner could sail much closer to the wind than a square-rigged vessel. Where a warship might need the wind behind it, or at most off to the side, a schooner could point almost directly into the wind and still make forward progress. Sailors call this pointing ability, and the schooner's was extraordinary. But pointing ability was only part of the equation. The other half was the hull. Schooner hulls were narrow, shallow, and built for speed. Where a Royal Navy frigate might draw 15 or 20 feet of water, meaning the bottom of the ship sat that far below the surface, a schooner might draw only 4 or 5 feet. This meant schooners could sail directly over reefs that would destroy a warship. They could slip into shallow bays, tidal creeks, and river mouths where no Navy vessel could follow. Combine the shallow draft with the fore and aft rig, and you had a vessel that could do things no other ship could. It could accelerate from a dead stop faster than anything in the water. It could change direction in a fraction of the time it took a warship. It could sail in conditions, light winds, shifting breezes, tight coastal passages that would leave a square-rigged ship dead in the water. And it could do all of this with a tiny crew. A schooner that might be 60 or 70 feet long could be operated by as few as 6 to 8 men. A comparable square-rigged vessel might need 40 or 50. This was not a minor detail. For pirates, a small crew meant a bigger share of the loot for everyone on board. Building a schooner was itself a different process than building a warship. Royal Navy vessels were constructed in enormous dockyards with hundreds of skilled workers, following detailed plans approved by the Admiralty. The process could take years and cost a fortune. A single ship of the line might require 3,000 oak trees. Schooners were built in small coastal yards by a handful of shipwrights who often worked from experience and instinct rather than formal blueprints. The wood was whatever grew nearby. In New England, that meant white oak for the frames and white pine for the planking. In the Caribbean, where pirates often modified or rebuilt captured vessels, tropical hardwoods like mahogany and lignum vitae were common. These Caribbean-built schooners were sometimes even faster than their northern cousins because the dense tropical wood allowed thinner planking without sacrificing strength, which meant less weight in the hull. The keel was the backbone of the ship, a single long timber running the length of the bottom. The frames, curved ribs of oak, were attached to the keel and gave the hull its shape. Then the planking went on. Long boards bent around the frames and fastened with iron or wooden pegs called tree nails. The whole process could be completed in a matter of weeks by an experienced crew. Compare that to the years it took to build a warship, and you start to understand why schooners multiplied so quickly. Pirates rarely built their own schooners from scratch. They took them. A common tactic was to capture a merchant schooner, throw the cargo overboard to lighten the ship, add a few extra guns, and go hunting. Some pirates modified their captured schooners extensively, cutting new gun ports, reinforcing the deck to handle the recoil of heavier cannons, and trimming the rigging for maximum speed. Others left them mostly stock, figuring that the original design was fast enough and any modifications might actually slow it down. The simplicity of the schooner also made repairs easy. If a mast broke or a section of hull was damaged, a pirate crew could beach the ship on a sandbar, make repairs with whatever materials were available, and be back on the water in days. A warship with the same damage might need to limp back to a naval dockyard hundreds of miles away. Now, to understand why pirates loved schooners, you need to understand how piracy actually worked during the Golden Age. Forget the Hollywood version with massive galleons firing broadsides at each other. Most pirate attacks were not battles, they were ambushes. The typical pirate operation looked like this. You found a spot along a known trade route, ideally near a narrow channel or a headland where merchant ships had to pass. You waited, hidden in a cove or behind an island. When a merchant vessel appeared, you came out fast, ran up alongside, and either intimidated the crew into surrendering or fired a few warning shots to make your point clear. Speed was everything. Not because you needed to catch the merchant ship. Most merchant vessels were slow, overloaded cargo haulers. Speed mattered because of what came after. Once you took the cargo, you needed to be gone before anyone could report what happened and send a warship after you. This is where the schooner became the perfect pirate weapon. A pirate in a schooner could anchor in a hidden cove that was too shallow for any warship to enter. When a target appeared, the schooner could accelerate out of hiding and close the distance before the merchant crew even understood what was happening. After the raid, the schooner could run in any direction the wind allowed, and because of its fore and aft rig, the wind almost always allowed at least one good escape route. If a warship appeared on the horizon during the attack, the pirate simply turned toward the wind and sailed away at an angle the warship could not match. If the warship tried to follow, the chase quickly turned into an exercise in frustration. The schooner would tack back and forth, zigzagging upwind, while the warship fell farther and farther behind with every turn. And if the warship somehow got close, the pirate had one final card to play: shallow water. A schooner drawing 4 feet could sail directly over a coral reef or into a tidal flat. The warship, drawing 15 or 20 feet, would have to stop or risk tearing its hull open. The pirate would simply sail into water that was too shallow to follow, wait for the warship to give up, and then slip away to the next island. This was not a theoretical advantage. This happened over and over and over again throughout the early 1700s. Navy captains wrote furious letters back to London describing the impossible task of catching pirates in schooners. They begged for faster ships. They begged for smaller ships. They begged for anything that could actually keep up. Captain Peter Solgaard of HMS Seahorse wrote about chasing a pirate schooner for an entire day off the coast of the Carolinas, only to watch it disappear into an inlet he could not enter. His ship drew too much water. By the time he found a way around, the pirate was long gone. Governor Woodes Rogers in Nassau complained repeatedly that the warships sent to help him were useless for chasing pirates because they were too large, too slow, and too deep in the water. He once wrote that trying to catch a pirate schooner with a fifth-rate warship was like trying to catch a rabbit with a cart horse. These were not exaggerations. The physics were simply against them. A square-rigged warship tacking upwind had to turn through roughly 90 degrees with every tack, losing speed and distance each time. A schooner tacking upwind turned through a much tighter angle and lost almost no speed. Over the course of a 6-hour chase into the wind, a schooner might cover twice the effective distance of its pursuer. The warship captain could watch through his telescope as the gap widened with every hour, knowing there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. The response from the Admiralty was often maddeningly bureaucratic. The Royal Navy was designed to fight other navies, not chase down small, fast raiders. Its ships were built for firepower, not speed. Retooling the entire fleet to deal with pirates would have been enormously expensive, and the people making budget decisions in London were thousands of miles from the problem. Some of the most famous pirates of the Golden Age understood the schooner's advantages better than anyone. Benjamin Hornigold, one of the founding figures of the Pirate Republic in Nassau, operated schooners extensively in the Bahamas and the Florida Straits. Hornigold recognized that the shallow waters around the Bahamas were essentially a natural fortress for anyone in a shallow draft vessel. His protege was a man named Edward Teach. You know him as Blackbeard. Blackbeard is famous for his flagship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, a large, heavily armed former French slave ship. But here is what gets overlooked. Blackbeard operated a small fleet, and the workhorses of that fleet were schooners. When Blackbeard blockaded the port of Charleston, South Carolina, in 1718, one of the most audacious acts of piracy in American history, he used his larger ships to intimidate, and his schooners to actually chase down and capture vessels trying to enter or leave the harbor. The schooners were the teeth of the operation. They were the ships that could actually run down a fleeing merchant vessel in the shallow coastal waters off the Carolinas. When a ship tried to make a break for open water, Blackbeard did not send the Queen Anne's Revenge lumbering after it. He sent a schooner. By the time the merchant captain realized what was happening, the schooner was already alongside, and armed men were climbing over the rail. The Queen Anne's Revenge was the flag, the symbol, the thing that made people terrified. But the schooners did the real work. Charles Vane was another pirate who relied heavily on schooners. Vane operated primarily in the Bahamas and the Windward Passage between Cuba and Hispaniola, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the Caribbean. His preferred tactic was classic schooner ambush warfare. Hide in a cove, wait for a target, sprint out, take the cargo, and vanish. Vane's career demonstrates both the power of the schooner and the frustration it caused the authorities. In 1718, Woodes Rogers, the newly appointed governor of the Bahamas, arrived in Nassau with a small fleet of warships and a mandate to eliminate piracy. Most of the pirates in Nassau accepted a royal pardon. Vane did not. Instead, Vane loaded a captured ship with explosives, set it on fire, and sent it drifting toward Rogers's fleet as a distraction. While the Navy scrambled to avoid the fireship, Vane slipped out of the harbor in his schooner, sailed right past the warships, and escaped into open water. Rogers's ships gave chase. They could not catch him. Vane continued pirating for months after that escape, using his schooner to raid shipping lanes that the Navy thought it had secured. Every time a warship appeared, the same pattern repeated. chase, pursuit, and the schooner disappearing over the horizon or into shallow water. Bartholomew Roberts, arguably the most successful pirate of the Golden Age, also made extensive use of schooners in his fleet. Roberts captured over 400 ships during his career, a staggering number that dwarfs every other pirate of the era. His operational model was essentially industrial-scale piracy, and schooners were critical to that model. Roberts would use his larger ships as floating bases and send schooners ahead to scout, to chase, and to cut off escape routes. The schooners functioned as the fast attack element of a larger tactical system. They could cover more ocean, check more hiding spots, and respond to opportunities faster than any single large vessel could. When Roberts identified a convoy, his schooners would fan out to identify the weakest ships, the ones lagging behind or sailing slightly apart from the group. By the time the convoy realized it was under attack, the schooners had already isolated their targets. And then there was Calico Jack Rackham. Rackham is mostly remembered today because of who sailed with him: Anne Bonny and Mary Red, two of the very few documented female pirates of the Golden Age. But his story also illustrates how central the schooner was to pirate operations at every level. Rackham did not command a massive fleet. He was not Blackbeard. He was not Bartholomew Roberts. He was a small-time operator running a single schooner through the waters around Jamaica and Cuba, picking off fishing boats and small merchant vessels. His schooner was his entire operation. It was his ship, his home, his escape vehicle, and his only asset. When the pirate hunter Jonathan Barnett finally caught up with Rackham in October 1720, it was specifically because Rackham had anchored his schooner in a bay off the western tip of Jamaica, and his crew had gotten drunk on captured rum. Barnett's sloop caught them at anchor, unable to run. If Rackham had been at sea, if he had seen Barnett coming with even an hour's warning, his schooner would have been gone. Barnett would have been writing another frustrated report about a pirate he could not catch. Instead, Rackham, Bonny, and Reed were all captured. The lesson was not lost on other pirates. The schooner could save your life, but only if you were actually sailing it. Stede Bonnet, the so-called gentleman pirate, provides yet another angle on the schooner story. Bonnet was a wealthy Barbados plantation owner who, for reasons that baffled everyone, including his own crew, decided to become a pirate in 1717. He bought a sloop, named it the Revenge, and set out to raid shipping. Bonnet was a terrible pirate. He had no sailing experience and no combat experience, but he had enough money to buy a fast vessel, and that vessel kept him alive far longer than his skills should have allowed. When things went badly, which was often, the speed of his ship gave him the option to run. The Navy caught him eventually, as it usually did when a pirate made enough mistakes, but the fact that an incompetent amateur survived for over a year as a pirate says everything about how much the ship itself mattered. But the schooner's influence on piracy went beyond individual captains and their tactics. It fundamentally changed the economics of piracy. Before the schooner became widely available, piracy was a high-cost, high-risk operation. You needed a large ship, a large crew, significant supplies, and heavy armament. The startup costs, if you want to think of it that way, were enormous. This limited piracy to well-organized groups with serious backing, often former privateers who already had ships from government-sanctioned raiding during wartime. The schooner democratized piracy. A small group of men with limited resources could acquire or build a schooner relatively cheaply. They did not need dozens of cannons or hundreds of crew members. 6 men in a fast schooner with a few swivel guns could take a merchant ship just as effectively as a crew of 200 in a frigate. Maybe more effectively, because the schooner could get close before the merchant even knew it was in danger. And when the cargo was divided among 6 men instead of 200, each man walked away rich. A single successful raid on a merchant carrying sugar, tobacco, or rum could set a small crew up for months. This is why the golden age of piracy exploded in the early 1700s. The schooner lowered the barrier to entry. Suddenly, disgruntled sailors, unemployed privateers, escaped servants, and anyone else with maritime skills and nothing to lose could go on the account. All they needed was a fast boat and a willingness to use violence. The proliferation of schooner-based piracy created a strategic nightmare for the colonial powers. The problem was not any single pirate. The problem was that there were dozens of them, scattered across thousands of miles of coastline and hundreds of islands, each operating independently in vessels that no warship could reliably catch. Traditional anti-piracy strategy relied on concentration of force. Send a powerful squadron to a known pirate base, attack it, and destroy the pirates. This worked against large, static targets. It did not work against dozens of small, fast ships that could relocate overnight. The navies tried adapting. The Royal Navy began purchasing and commissioning its own sloops and schooners for anti-piracy patrols. These smaller vessels could, in theory, match the pirates in speed and draft. But there were problems. First, there were never enough of them. The Royal Navy's priorities were European power politics, not Caribbean policing. Ships, officers, and funding were allocated based on the strategic priorities of the moment, and piracy, while annoying, was rarely the top concern. Second, even when the Navy had fast ships, finding pirates was still enormously difficult. The Caribbean is vast. The coastline is fractured into thousands of islands, bays, and inlets. A schooner anchored behind a mangrove island was essentially invisible unless you sailed right past it. Without reliable intelligence about pirate movements, naval patrols were often sailing in circles, burning through supplies without ever sighting a target. Third, the legal and political situation was a mess. Different colonial governors had different attitudes toward piracy. Some actively sheltered pirates because pirate spending was good for the local economy. Others were sympathetic because pirates targeted the ships of rival empires. Coordinating anti-piracy operations across British, French, Spanish, and Dutch colonial territories was nearly impossible. The navies eventually found solutions, but they were rarely elegant. The most effective anti-piracy tool turned out to be not a better ship, but better intelligence. Informants, paid spies, turned pirates, and captured crew members provided the information that naval commanders needed to set traps. The strategy shifted from chasing pirates to predicting where they would be. If you knew a pirate was operating in a specific shipping lane, you could position fast sloops at both ends of the lane and squeeze inward. If you knew a pirate was using a particular cove as a base, you could send a shallow draft vessel in while a larger ship waited offshore to block the exit. This intelligence-based approach worked. Slowly. It did not eliminate piracy overnight, but it changed the calculus for pirates. The schooner could still outrun a warship in open water, but it could not outrun a trap set with advanced knowledge. The other factor that eventually reduced the schooner's pirate advantage was the evolution of naval ship design. By the mid-1700s, navies were building purpose-designed anti-piracy vessels. These ships borrowed from schooner design principles, incorporating shallower drafts, fore and aft rigging on some masts, and hull forms optimized for speed rather than firepower. The Bermuda sloop became one of the most effective anti-piracy vessels in the Caribbean. Built in Bermuda from local cedar, these sloops were fast, weatherly, and shallow enough to follow pirates into most coastal waters. They were not quite as nimble as a schooner, but they were close, and they carried enough armament to overpower one. The combination of better intelligence, purpose-built pursuit vessels, and sustained political will eventually broke the back of Golden Age piracy by the 1730s. But it is worth noting that it took the combined resources of the British, French, and Spanish empires decades to solve a problem created largely by a single ship design. The schooner did not disappear when the Golden Age ended. Far from it. The same qualities that made it perfect for piracy made it perfect for legitimate commerce. Schooners became the backbone of coastal trade in the Americas throughout the 1700s and 1800s. They carried cargo between ports too small for larger ships. They fished the Grand Banks. They carried mail, passengers, and news along the coast. But the schooner's post-piracy history had a much darker chapter as well. After Britain and the United States banned the Atlantic slave trade in 1807 and 1808 respectively, slave traders turned to schooners for exactly the same reasons pirates had. Speed to outrun naval patrols, shallow draft to navigate coastal African waterways and slip into hidden landing spots in the Americas, small size to avoid detection. The same ship design that helped pirates steal sugar and gold was now being used to traffic human beings. The Royal Navy's West Africa Squadron, tasked with intercepting slave ships, faced the same frustrations that anti-piracy patrols had faced a century earlier. Their warships were too slow, too deep, and too cumbersome to reliably catch schooners making the Middle Passage. It took decades and the eventual adoption of faster, purpose-built patrol vessels before the squadron could make a serious dent in the illegal trade. The schooner once again had proven that speed and agility could defeat raw power. During the American Revolution, schooners served as the first warships of the Continental Navy. The Hannah, commissioned in 1775, is often considered the first vessel of the American naval service. It was a schooner. The logic was the same as the pirates. The fledgling American Navy could not match the Royal Navy in firepower, so it relied on speed and agility to raid British supply lines. Privateers during the Revolution and the War of 1812 used schooners extensively, essentially reviving the pirate playbook for sanctioned warfare. The Baltimore Clipper, a type of topsail schooner developed in Maryland, became famous as a privateer vessel. These ships were so fast and so effective that British merchants complained bitterly about the inability of the Royal Navy to protect their shipping. The Revenue Marine, which later became the United States Coast Guard, used schooners to patrol the American coastline and enforce customs laws. Smugglers, like pirates before them, favored schooners for the same reasons: speed, shallow draft, and the ability to outrun anything the government could put on the water. During Prohibition in the 1920s, rum runners used schooners to bring liquor from Canada and the Caribbean into American ports. The Coast Guard, often operating its own schooners, engaged in chases that echoed the pirate pursuits of 200 years earlier. The technology had changed. Engines were now common, but the fundamental dynamic remained the same: a small, fast vessel trying to outrun a larger, better-armed pursuer. The schooner's legacy in naval architecture is enormous. The principles it popularized, fore and aft rigging, shallow drafts, hull forms designed for speed, influenced virtually every sailing vessel that came after it. The clipper ships of the mid-1800s, the fastest sailing vessels ever built, owed a direct design debt to the schooner tradition. Even today, the schooner's influence persists. Modern racing sailboats use fore and aft rigs that would be recognizable to an 18th-century schooner captain. The basic aerodynamic principles that made a schooner fast, the same principles that allow an airplane wing to generate lift, are unchanged. But the schooner's greatest legacy might be cultural rather than technical. The golden age of piracy, the era that gave us Blackbeard and Anne Bonny and the Jolly Roger and Buried Treasure, was made possible by a specific piece of technology arriving at a specific moment in history. Without the schooner, piracy in the Caribbean would have been a very different phenomenon: slower, less widespread, less romantic, and far less successful. The pirates of the Golden Age were not just criminals. They were, in a very real sense, early adopters. They recognized the potential of a new technology before the established powers did. They exploited its advantages ruthlessly. And by the time the navies figured out how to respond, the pirates had already reshaped the map of the Caribbean, redistributed millions in stolen wealth, and created a mythology that has lasted 300 years. All because a shipbuilder in Massachusetts figured out a better way to hang a sail. The next time you see a painting of a pirate ship, look closely. Chances are it is not the massive galleon with skull and crossbones flags that Hollywood loves to show. If the painting is historically accurate, it is probably something much smaller. Lower to the water, 2 masts instead of 3. Sails running along the length of the ship instead of across it. It is a schooner. The ship that made pirates impossible to catch. The ship that drove admirals insane. The ship that changed how wars were fought, how trade was conducted, and how an entire ocean was policed. And it started as a fishing boat. If you found this one interesting, there is another story that connects directly to this one. The story of how the Royal Navy finally adapted and built ships specifically designed to hunt these schooners down. That video is on screen right now. Hit subscribe if you want more stories like this. I cover the forgotten history behind the ships, weapons, and strategies that shaped the world. I will see you in the next one.